Welcome to Landscape Photo Editing Sessions. I'm Raitea Arkiri. In this episode, I'm going to show you my processing workflow for this Astro Selfie. So I took this image on Mauna Kea, Hawaii. So to get an Astro Selfie, I basically set up my camera for a time-lapse, shot off a time-lapse with my regular Milky Way settings, which was 25 seconds, ISO 6400, and the aperture was at f2. And then I just started firing away and went in front of the camera, did a few different poses. So I did a few sitting down, standing up, and this is the one I like, with my standing up with my hands in my pocket. And then after about 10 frames, I just went back. That's the light from my phone, and shut off the time lapse, and that's it. So right now I have a very crude looking image and it's super noisy, and by the time I process this, I'm going to be using all these photos. It's going to be nice and the noise will be reduced by a large amount. Alright, to start, I'm going to remove that vignette, and an easy way to gauge the vignette is to increase the contrast all the way, and then I can go to my manual corrections and increase the amount until the vignette is almost removed, or try to get it balanced as possible without lightening those spots. I also need to adjust the midpoint, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to reset the contrast, and then I want to reduce the highlights a little bit and increase the shadows. So I want to get a little bit of the shadow detail in here, and also I'm going to increase the blacks just to pull out as much detail as I can from that. It looks pretty bad now, but when I combine all these photos together, it'll look better. I'm also going to adjust the white balance, so to make it easier to do that, I'm going to increase the vibrance and saturation all the way so that I can see what colors are appearing in the sky. So I want to make this a little bit cooler, but I still want to retain the warm tint in the Milky Way, so I'm just going to slide this to the left a little bit. And it was about good where it was. I also want to get rid of the green color cast, so I'm going to make this a bit more magenta. Alright, that's good. And while I'm at it, I'm going to reduce the color noise. So these clouds are going to have a lot of color noise, so I'm going to increase the color noise to about 50 and then increase the smoothness all the way. And I'm also gonna do luminous noise reduction about 20, just to clean it up a little bit. Then I can go ahead and reset the vibrance and saturation, and then I'm gonna increase the vibrance to 40, so just to pull out a little bit of color out of the Milky Way. Alright, I think that's all for that. And now I'm going to copy and paste these settings across all of the pictures. So Control-Shift-C to copy. I'm going to make sure check all, and then copy, and then Shift-click to the last picture I want to copy to. And then Control-Shift-V, and that just copied all the settings to the other pictures. And then finally I want to open it in Photoshop as layers. Alright, that's good. So with all these layers, I'm going to create a special layer just for the ground. So I'm going to select all the layers, shift click, and pressing Ctrl J to duplicate them. Next thing I'm going to do is use image stacking to reduce noise. So I'm going to adjust the opacities of these layers. So the second one will be 50%, third one will be 33. Fourth will be 25. Fifth, 20. Then 16%. Then 14. Then 12, 11, and 10. So there's a formula for this, and I just memorized all of the percentages already. So that just reduced a huge amount of noise by combining all the photos together. See that? I'm going to merge these layers with Control E, and then I'm going to rename this to ground. I'm going to use this for the ground. Alright, next thing I want to do, I want to layer for the clouds. So I'm going to find layers that have the best cloud coverage, and I think further into the shot the cloud started moving inward more to cover more, and I like that better. So I'm going to use a few of these last frames. And with the ground, if I combine all of these layers, I lose detail in the clouds. So I still want to retain some of the detail in the cloud, as you can see in the single frame. Alright, so I'm going to use 4 photos to combine the layers. And I'm going to do image stacking to these ones to reduce noise. Alright, so I think this is pretty good, and I'm happy with the amount of detail in the clouds compared to the ground layer, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to duplicate those layers and call it clouds. So I'm using this layer only for the clouds. I can reset the opacities, and by the way, I'm just using my number keys on my keyboard to change the percentages. So if I press 5, that'll change the opacity to 50%. If I press 5 2 times, change it to 55. So that's it. So 0 is 100%. Alright, so the problem with this one is that I like the clouds in this one, but I don't want my hands right there. So I'm going to find other layers where I'm sitting down, like these ones. So I'm going to use these 4 layers to combine them, and this cloud layer is just going to be for the clouds just in this area. So I'm going to duplicate them first, and then I can stack them. So changing the opacities. Alright. I'm going to call this clouds 2. And also I'm going to duplicate the ground layer, because notice this line going up in the sky, that's a laser on the other mountain. So this is Mauna Loa, and that's an atmospheric observatory, so they use the laser for some research. So I'm going to duplicate the ground layer, and this layer is just going to be for the laser. And finally, I'm going to find maybe 5 layers or 6 for the Milky Way. So I can hide these layers, and then so I think I'm going to use 5 layers for stacking the Milky Way. So I can go ahead and delete these layers. I'm not going to use these ones anymore. And I'm going to start stacking the Milky Way. So the method I use to stack the Milky Way, since it does move across the sky, I'm going to auto-align the layers and create reference points so I can manually warp the image after the auto line, because it doesn't do a perfect job of lining up the stars. So the first thing I'm going to do is create those reference points, and basically these are just going to be dots on one of the stars. So I'm going to use my hard brush, hardness at 100, and then it's going to be really small. So just large, slightly larger than a star. And I'm going to find a star that is visible throughout all the frames. So I think this one is a nice candidate. And then I'm going to use a white brush, and then use my holding down the Alt button, I can check where the center of the star is, and then I'm just going to let it go and then make a click, and that's one reference point. So I gotta do this for the rest of the layers. And the reason I do this is because I'm using a crop censored camera, and it's really noisy. So if I had something full frame like the A7S, Sony A7S, then this wouldn't be a problem, and it might not be a problem for you if you're shooting a full frame. Alright, so I got the reference point for one corner, and I'm going to do it for this corner, the middle over here, the other corner, middle, and then center around the Milky Way. Alright, I got all my reference points set up, and now I'm going to auto align the layers. But before that, I want to mask out the foreground so that Photoshop doesn't use the foreground for aligning. So I'm just going to use a large black brush and with 100% opacity, and then mask out everything in the foreground. So I just want the sky. And then I can copy the mask to the other layers by holding down the Alt button and then dragging the mask icon to the other layers. I'm going to make the other layers visible. Shift click and select them all, and then go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, leave that on Auto, and then press OK. Alright, I can delete these layers. Then now I can start manually warping the images so that they're exactly aligned, because the auto align function did somewhat of a good job, but the corners still need to be aligned correctly. So that's why I made the reference points. So I'm going to use the bottom layer as the base layer, and then go to the second layer of the Milky Way and change the opacity to 50%. I just pressed 5, and I gotta have the move tool selected to be able to use the number key to change the opacity. Alright, so as you can see, I'm using these reference points, and if they're off, then that means the stars aren't aligned. So if I toggle the visibility, you can see the change. So that's basically probably for almost all the stars. I'm gonna have to align them. So I'm gonna start off with the bottom middle reference point. I'm gonna press Ctrl T, which is the transform tool, where I have the second layer selected, and then go to the warp tool, and I'm just gonna warp this layer. I'm gonna click and hold drag and warp it until the star moves. So for some reason Photoshop doesn't register the first click, but on the second time should work. So I'm just gonna move the star or reference point around until it's like perfectly aligned with the other one. So I can do that with all of them. Alright, so once I'm done with warping, I go and check the alignment by toggling the visibility on and off. So the most important reference point is the middle one for the Milky Way, and I absolutely gotta have that one aligned because that's the most crucial, because the Milky Way is the main part. So I'm going to use my arrow keys just to nudge it a little bit so it's perfectly aligned, and I'm going to keep toggling that on and off, and so I want the stars perfectly aligned. Alright, so that looks pretty good now. And once I'm done with the layer, I can go ahead and change to the third layer. I'm going to make the second layer toggle the visibility off. I don't want that layer to be seen, and then change the third layer to 50% opacity. And do the same thing, warp it. Once I've aligned all the layers, I can do the normal image stacking now. So the second layer will be 50%, the third layer will be 33%, fourth layer will be 25%, and fifth layer will be 20%. Alright, so now when I zoom into 100%, it's pretty much noise free. If I go into the toggle the solo, you can see it's pretty noisy, but after the fifth frame of stacking, it's much better. So especially for the corner. Alright, once I'm done with that, I can merge these layers, and then I'm going to call this layer Milky Way. And I can simply just use the spot healing brush and then just get rid of the reference points now. Let's see, this should be 75. And when I'm making the reference points, I try to do stars that are not that visible or prominent. Like, I wouldn't do this cluster of stars or the larger stars or planets. Alright, so I forgot the most important part, which is the layer for me, which is the standing up layer. So I can go back to Lightroom and find those layers. Find that one. Alright, so this is the layer I'm going to use for the subject. So I'm going to open this in Photoshop, and then I'm going to drag it in. Alright, so I'm going to do a little noise reduction on this layer just to get it cleaned up, because I'm going to use this layer just for my jacket and body and stuff. So I'm going to rename this one to subject. And then I'm going to go to filter, noise, and dust and scratches. So this will get rid of those large noise. And then I'm going to use a filter called Noise Aware, but the regular Photoshop plugin will work pretty good too, or Lightroom. So I'm going to do a high amount of noise reduction to this image, so more luminance reduction. Alright, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to fix the clouds layers now. So this layer is just for the surrounding clouds, and then this layer is for the clouds over here. So I can just mask it out of the first layer. I just want to mask out these hands that are sticking out. And I gotta make sure that's 100% opacity, then 0% hardness. I just want a soft brush, so I can do most of it, and then I'm going to increase the hardness once I get to here. Alright, I'm also going to fix the clouds. The pattern kind of changed by using another layer, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that by using a black brush and just paint it across the pattern just to fix it. And then I can select these two layers and then combine them, merge them, and then I can add my subject layer in, and then just holding down Alt, I'm going to make a black layer mask, and I just want to fill in the arms this time. I'm also going to fill in the jacket because it's going to be a little bit less noisy and a deeper black. And I think might as well do the head too, since it's a little bit sharper. Alright, so for this clouds layer, I'm just going to get rid of some of those speckles with the healing brush, spot healing brush, and then I'm going to do a noise reduction layer for that. So I'm going to create a duplicate layer first and then go to my noise reduction plugin. And I'm just going to change the opacity to 50%. Alright, so it's a balance between some noise and having some of the detail in the pants too. Alright, so with this ground layer, I'm going to make a layer mask and then just mask out the subject, the clouds, and the sky. So an easier way would just to mask out the ground and then just invert the layer. So I'm going to mask that out. I'm also going to solo the layer, make it easier to see. Alright, so once that's done, I'm going to press Alt on the layer masks to see the layer mask with better detail. And then I'm going to invert the layer mask with Control I. And then I can unsolo the layers. And I'm going to toggle the visibility on and off just to check. So I'm going to go back and take away some of the layer some of the edges of the clouds. I don't want those to be in there. Alright, that's good. And next thing I want to do is make the Milky Way layer on top. I'm going to mask this out. So I'm going to create a black layer mask for this one. And then start painting it back in, just with a soft brush. So I'm probably going to increase the hardness and then get the edges first, and then I can fill in the rest easily. Alright, so once that's done, I can just use a polygonal lasso tool. I have the layer mask showing, and just select around the sky using the white portion, and then I'm going to fill it with white, pressing Control Delete with my selection, and that'll fill it with the foreground color. Alright, so now the Milky Way's masked in. And finally, I'm going to mask in the laser. Since when I did that auto align, the laser kind of blurred out. So I'm going to put it back in by making a selection with it. So I'm just going to use the polygonal lasso tool for the selection. And just selecting around. Alright, so I'm going to select that, select the laser, oops, and press backspace to undo that, then zoom in, back in, and then complete the selection. Alright, I'm going to use Refine Edge to try to get that laser in. So let's try 2 pixels. I think that's too much. Maybe 0.5. Yeah, I think 1 was good, I guess, and then... Alright. Alright, that didn't do anything. I'm going to shift the edge just a little bit. Alright. Alright, it's going to be tricky, but I'm just going to try that. See if that did a good job. And yeah, it did a pretty decent job. And I'm happy with that. So now the laser is more visible. And next thing I can do is I'm just going to crop it in a little bit. I can delete that original laser layer now. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to fix is this huge color cast. So this magenta color cast was because the vignette, I removed the vignette and then it's going to increase the exposure, causing a lot of color casting by increasing the exposure. So to fix that, I'm going to make a new layer, and this is going to be a color correction or color casting layer. So I'm just going to call it cast. I'm going to change the blending mode to color, and this works by brushing in color onto the layer. So any color I paint onto there, it's gonna change it. So I chose that kind of greenish color right there, and it changed it to green. But the way to use this is to have a low opacity, maybe 15%, and then just sample layers just at the surrounding areas. So for this layer, this plant, I'm gonna change it to green. And an easier way to check if the true colors is to increase the saturation by creating a vibrance layer, and now I can easily see what I'm doing. So I'm going to paint the green on from that plant. So I'm just going to paint onto the plants the green part. Alright, next thing I'm going to sample it from the clouds, and then just going to fix the corners over here. Alright, I'm going to try to balance it out just a little bit better. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity of this just to make it a bit more realistic. So 80%, maybe 70. Alright, so that's pretty good, I think. And I can take away this, hide this vibrance layer, and now it looks much better now. So that color cast is pretty much gone, but I can do just a little bit better, I think. So I'm going to do a duplicate layer of that, and then I'm just going to select all and then delete. And then start out fresh. Alright, so I'm going to make it, sample it from there, and I want to sample it with this layer on, but yeah. So I'm going to try to fix that color cast. Alright, I was just testing to see if it was still working. Alright, I think that's enough. And it did a pretty good job. I'm just going to reduce the opacity just a little bit. Alright, so next thing I'm going to reduce the exposure for those surrounding areas, and that should fix the problem. I'm just going to create a simple S-curve too, just to retain any other highlights I have there. And using a low opacity brush, I'm just going to brush along those corner areas that needs it the most. Alright, I think it leads a little bit more. There we go. Alright, so that looks pretty good now. And next thing I'm going to do is adjust the contrast in the foreground just to make it a bit better. I'm going to make it darker. I'm also going to increase the highlights over here, so I want the clouds to be a bit brighter. So it gives it a more dreamy look having the brighter clouds. I'm also going to mask out the Milky Way, or the sky. So I'm just going to use a soft white brush or black brush and mask it out. Alright, that's pretty good. Alright, now I'm going to work on the Milky Way a bit. So I want to reduce the brightness of this. This is a little bit bright right now. And I'm also going to retain the brightness over here. So I just want to bring that back up. So this just kind of reduces the brightness of the highlights. And I want to bring out the Milky Way details just a little bit, so I'm gonna click on, using the target adjustment tool, click on the bright part of the Milky Way, and then on the dark part I'm just gonna reduce the contrast a little bit. I mean dark parts a little bit. And also for this one I gotta mask out that foreground. I want it to affect the foreground. There we go. And for this one I'm just going to use a gradient to blend it. Alright, there we go. And I'm noticing color cast along these areas, so I'm gonna add a Vibrance and Saturation layer and gonna fix those color cast. So using a new layer, I'm just gonna change it to color using a brush, and then I'm just gonna sample out the blue area. So right along over here. And then with the low brightness, opacity, I'm gonna brush along those purple areas and fix the color cast. And even along here, it's kind of a yellow greenish tinge. Alright, so I think that's pretty good. I can delete this layer, and now I don't have that color cast anymore. Alright, now I want to work on the color of the Milky Way. So it's pretty bland right now, but I'm gonna make it a lot more orange. So I'm gonna change this curve adjustment layer, the layer blending, to color, and then I'm gonna go to my curves and take away the blue in the highlights. And I'm also going to increase the blue just a little bit in the shadows. And yeah. Alright. And then I'm going to increase the reds. So this will bring out the orange in the Milky Way. In the highlights, specifically. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to maybe reduce the greens just a little bit. Alright, I'm going to invert that mask and then go back and just paint in the Milky Way just with that color. Alright, so that's pretty good. I'm going to go back to my reds and yeah, fix it just a little bit. Alright, next thing I want to bring out more blue in the clouds too. I'm still noticing a color cast in here. Alright, so what I'm going to do is add a hue saturation layer and make the clouds more blue and also take away the color cast. So I'm going to go sample the color I want to take away, and then it's cyan, so I'm going to desaturate that. I'm also going to desaturate the greens in there. Alright, that's pretty good. And also I'm going to add more blue to those clouds. So I'm going to add another hue saturation layer and then colorize it. And then add a bluish color to it. I'm going to invert the layer mask and just paint in the areas I want. So it needs to be a little bit more blue. And then I'm just going to reduce the opacity just to balance it out. Alright, so that's pretty good. So I think I want to reduce the brightness of the sky just a little bit more. And I'm going to mask out the foreground. Alright, wrong way. I'm going to invert that. And there we go. So obviously that's too dark, so I'm going to probably change the opacity, maybe 20%, maybe 30. Alright, that's pretty good. And also that's a little bit too red for me, so I'm just going to try to increase the greens to try to balance that out. Maybe just reduce the red. Alright, I think that's a little bit better. And I'm going to create Luminosity Mask to increase the vibrance in the Milky Way. So I go to my Luminosity Mask and find one with just the Milky Way, and then select it, and then make a Vibrance Saturation layer and increase the saturation. Alright, so I think that's pretty good. Alright, finally I'm going to adjust the color of the whole picture. So I think I want to make it a bit cooler, just in the shadows. So I'm going to change it to color, the adjustment blending mode. Then I'm going to increase the blues. And then I'm also gonna try something else. Alright, I'm just gonna go to my reds and then increase the reds and the highlights. Go to my greens. Increase the greens just a little bit. Alright, that's pretty good. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to fix the corners just a little bit more. Alright, that's pretty good. And in the shadows, I would just want to make it a bit warmer, actually. Alright, that's pretty good. I'm just gonna change the opacity of that and just brush in the rest of it too. Alright, I'm gonna start adding vignettes now. So I just have a action for that. It basically creates a curve already, and I'm just gonna use the gradient. So I'm not gonna do a regular vignette. I'm just gonna do a vignette just for the sky like that. And maybe change it to do 70%, and then a vignette for the ground. Change it to 70%. And finally, I'm going to create an origin effect. I have an action for it, but it's basically making a stamp for it. Stamp for all the layers. So I'm going to Control Alt Shift and E, and that'll create a copy of all the visible layers. And then blurring it with Gaussian blur. So I'm going to use around 20 pixel radius, and then changing the opacity to 20%. And then I'm going to add a glow to it by making a clipping mask with a curve right there. And then increasing the highlights and then bringing the shadows back down. So I think that's just a little bit too much, and that's pretty good. So the origin effect just really adds to overall dreaminess, and I really like the effect. It kind of fixes some of the weird parts and also mixes in some highlights and shadows, and it just makes it a little bit more nicer to look at. Kind of reduces the crunchiness of the Milky Way. So I think I'm gonna reduce the shadows just a little bit more. Alright. That's pretty good, and that's about it. And the final thing I will do is save it, merge the layers, change it to the resolution I used to upload to the web, and then I just do a smart sharpen with 200, and it looks pretty good. It looks nice and sharp with that smart sharpen. The stars, there's not much noise, the ground is pretty good, and it's overall pretty balanced. So I'm gonna go back. Alright, so that was a long process and basically a huge amount of adjustments. So layers just for the clouds, for the subject, for the ground, for the Milky Way, for the laser, fixing the color cast, again fixing the color cast, this time with exposure, adjusting the contrast of the ground, of the sky again, reducing the color cast for the sky, adjusting the color of the Milky Way, the clouds, adjusting the sky some more, increasing the saturation, changing up the color, fixing the corners again, making the ground a bit warmer, adding vignettes, then finally the final touch, the Orton effect. Alright, so if you found this video useful, give it a like or comment, and thanks for watching.